This is Podcast Theory.
Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Podcast Theory Live. I'm your host, Jason Sircone. It is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024, and today I want to do a little reflecting because yesterday I put together a new video series, which I'm super pumped to roll out here soon, and you'll hear all about it once it goes live to everyone. But I put that series together, and as I was doing so, I was reflecting throughout it on 10 years in podcasting, or nearly 10 years. And that funny aside, I actually did terrible math. And when I hit my 9-year anniversary, I thought it was my 10. So I did this big thing about how I just hit my 10-year mark. And then once I made that live, I realized that I was off by a year. So we're almost there at this point, just a few more months, and we'll be officially 10 years in the podcasting space doing something in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to find a fun way to celebrate with all of you when that day comes. Nevertheless, as I was putting this content together, the idea was to give you a slight preview. I was talking about some of my views on the advice that is going around in the podcast space today, mainly about how there's only one way to produce, or to put it another way, because that's probably inaccurate. I don't think that's the blanket advice that's going around, but there is some bad advice. And the numbers that we see reflect that, because I think people get locked into doing podcasting a certain way. And when they do that, it can throw them off course because they don't see immediate results, or they tell themselves they're failing because they're not hitting these standards that somebody else laid out for them. It's a mess. So I want to take some time to give my viewpoints and my perspectives on said subject. So that video series will go live and you'll know all about it. But as I was reflecting in that time frame, thinking about 10 years in podcasting, it's been a while. And I thought about a lot of the changes and evolutions that have taken place in this industry, in this world, that I've been a part of, that I've got to experience, that I've got to learn from. And there are some things that have changed for the better. I think there are some things that have changed for the worse. But overall, my thought on this is that podcasting is still wild, wild west. There's still a lot that we can find out about this medium, that we can do better with this medium, and what things we can do within the industry to elevate this medium and take it to the stratosphere that it has the potential to reach. That's going to take time. That's going to take commitment. It's going to take way more creators getting beyond 3 episodes, which was a major part of my video series as well, because that number is staggering. You'll have to check out my commentary on that when you check out the video series. But what I started thinking about after I got done doing that work, when I was just sitting back and relaxing while I was making dinner, I was thinking about my time in this space. And again, things I've learned, things I've done, things I've experienced. And it got me wondering, with all these changes and all of these moving pieces that are in place for podcasting today, clearly when I started, it was way different. Made me wonder what I would do differently if I was coming into this fresh in 2024, in July of 2024, as I sit here and I come live and I talk to you through the podcast waves today. What would I do differently today than I did 10 years ago? We'll call it 10 years for conversation's sake. Close enough, right? One thing I know for sure that I would do is I would do a lot better job planning. I've told this story before. When I first got into podcasting, it was out of spite. It was because I had a troll on Twitter who I got into a crazy exchange with and discovered he hosted a podcast. And I was in that realm of wanting to start a podcast, but not knowing what to do it on or what subject matter to cover. And when I saw that this guy was in my industry talking bad on me, I felt like me and my friend could do a better podcast than him. And we just jumped in. And within 2 weeks, we had a podcast out. That's very short-sighted thinking. Now, I didn't know what I didn't know, but I can say with confidence, I learned a ton from doing it that way. I was very fortunate that I had experience in radio and I loved it. So this was a natural transition that just took place 13 years later. But when it happened, it grabbed me and I instantly fell in love. So I knew podcasting was where I wanted to be, despite the fact that we just jumped in the pool with no floaties, with no swimming abilities, and figured things out. In 2015, I think that was an easier thing to do. Podcasting obviously had been around for over a decade at that point, but it was still a fairly new medium that people had yet to embrace. Fast forward to 2024, podcasting is all the rage. And if you're not creating podcasts, more than likely, on some level, you're consuming them. The public, the society, the culture, the world we live in, people are consuming podcast content on a daily basis, sometimes not even realize they're doing, or not even realizing that they're doing so, because they may be consuming clips on social media. They may be finding information online that's also pulled from a podcast. It's maybe just the transcription version. So if they're reading something that was generated through a podcast, there's so much more that revolves around podcasting these days. It's a completely different world. So I can say with confidence, looking back on my time in this space, if I was to come into this fresh today, I know that I would spend a lot more time planning for the long-term growth and success that I would want to experience in this space. Now, can you jump in and can you learn things on the go? Absolutely. That's a great way to learn, in my opinion. Sometimes it's that fear of the unknown and going head first and just putting the plan together. It's like putting, what do they say? They put the plane together while you're in the air. I probably botched that phrase, but nevertheless, you get my point. It's there's a lot to learning on the fly. I feel I'm doing that a lot with live streaming, but at the same time, anything I'm doing from a podcasting perspective or from a live streaming perspective these days, I have more of a plan of action. I'm thinking more about the long-term results that I want to achieve. So it's not just, well, I can't stand this guy on Twitter, so let's start a podcast and show him. I honestly, thinking back on that, have no idea what I expected to accomplish by doing that. But I treat it as a blessing. I've said this many times. It pulled me into the medium. It got me hooked. It got me addicted. And I've been doing it ever since. That's not how everybody else is. Now, I'm not saying that anybody else has started a podcast out of spite, but I can say that I would assume that many people that have gotten their start, but only gotten a few episodes in and then threw in the towel, most likely didn't have a long-term plan and a long-term strategy of how they were going to utilize podcasting to embellish everything that they have to say, to add more visibility to their brand, to put a new spin on the stories that built their brand or built themselves as an entrepreneur or a professional. There's so much value in these stories and in this type of content, but if you don't have a plan on how you're going to bring it to the world, you're more than likely going to get stuck or have a lot of trouble cutting through all of the noise that's out there. For me, I feel that I would have done much more justice to the overall production that my friend Jason and I had, or the production we had put together when we did our first podcast, had we actually put some more thought into a lot of the foundational questions that I ask anybody I work with today, because I didn't know these things, obviously. And I think there was a part of me when I think back and try to remember all of that time period, there was a bit of cockiness that I was bringing to the microphone. I did radio in college. I could do this too. It's a completely different animal. And I learned that once I jumped in. But today, advice I can impart to you is that there are a lot of resources out there and people that have been doing this for a long time, myself included, who want podcasters to succeed and thrive in this space. And we are more than willing to give our time and give our experiences to you so you don't make the same mistakes. We fell so you can stand up and run. I am just making up weird coined phrases and spinning them my own way today, and I'm loving every second of it. That's definitely one thing I would do differently. I would look at the strategy of the entire process of what I want to do, or the entire production of what I want to do, and define how it's going to serve me. And I would come up with a much better reason than spite, because that's just silly. Another thing that I would do, and this is something that I ended up doing, I don't talk about this a lot, but I feel like I should. And I won't say that you need to do it for the period of time that I did it, but what ended up happening was my friend Jason and I did our show, and it was consistent at first, then it got sporadic, then I took it over on my own, and then I felt like I wanted to go a different direction than the content that was being created within that podcast, so I shut that down, started a new one, and I got maybe 20 episodes deep into that podcast when I realized that I was loving what I was doing, but I felt like even by giving myself the experience of having the conversations with my guests, I wasn't reaching a level of comfort and building a skill set that I was happy with by doing that, which again, I 100% believe in putting in the reps and being present with the people in front of you and working out those skills as you create that content. There's a ton of value in that. Don't get me wrong. I feel that's a big part of it. But for me, I felt like I needed to take some time away to study and see what other people were doing in the space, and not just in the podcast space. I was looking at production as a whole. So what I decided to do at that time was shut down that podcast. And I took a year and a half and just gave myself, I don't want to call it a crash course because there was a year and a half invested into this, but I took a lot of time to study how broadcasters were telling stories to the camera. How were they talking about certain athletes if I was watching sports? How were commentators covering the games? How were newscasters talking about sports, weather, the news of the day? How were radio personalities telling their story through the microphones? I got very analytical with it. And it's funny I bring this up today, and this all dovetails in our empowered podcasting morning chat this morning. We were talking about finding your voice. And a lot of that voice is developed through the repetition, through the practice, through bringing your authentic self to the microphone with you. But I learned a lot about myself just by seeing how others were telling their stories. And as I evaluated it and got very analytical, not just watching for the entertainment value, but watching to see what I could learn, there were pieces of things that different broadcasters and newscasters and sports reporters and field reporters, I mean, I was watching everything from an analytical standpoint, and I was seeing what I liked about how they communicated, how they told stories, how they were making that connection with the audience. And I was able to draw certain aspects of what I saw and interject it into my own delivery. And as I continued to grow this skill set over time, once I dove back in, I was able to think about, okay, I like how this person takes a second after they finish a thought, so there's no filler word in between. I can do that too. I enjoy having a little bit of silence in between my thoughts, versus where we all sometimes get thrown off is we feel we need to throw a filler word in there to eliminate that silence. What I learned from watching others was that silence can be your friend. And I think it sounds much more poignant when there's silence following a thought versus a drawn out or one of the things that still blows me away, and I don't pass judgment, but I listen to radio personalities and DJs and you name it. People, I still do this to this day. And in no way, shape, or form do I feel that I'm perfect, nor will I ever be. But I still listen to how a lot of people in very prominent roles use like the filler words are sometimes, in many cases, out of control. The point I'm driving at here is, if I had to start fresh today, I would take some time to evaluate what other people are doing in the space. I would listen to podcasters. I would listen to radio DJs. I would listen to radio sportscasters, radio broadcasters. I would listen to newscasters, people in the field, the anchors. I would listen to anybody that is delivering a message via the camera or via the microphone, and I would discover what I like about what they're doing, what I don't like about what they're doing, and I would find ways that I could interweave some of those skills that they've developed into my own delivery. A lot of times when we start podcasting, we just turn on the microphone and we go. There is value in that. There is a lot you can learn on the fly just by putting in repetitions. I would never say don't put in the reps. As a golfer, the practice swings are huge. You've got to put in the reps. You've got to put in the practice swings in order to develop your voice. But taking some time to see what others are doing, see how they're doing it, finding out what you like, what you don't like, what you can interject into your own practices, what you can leave out. It's a great practice, and it can truly help mold who you become as a podcaster. And I'm not saying that you copy somebody's delivery and their storytelling abilities verbatim, because that's not authentic. That's not you. But learning what people have done before you can truly help bring you along and put you in a much better place to succeed. You're going to discover your own voice along the way, but taking some time, and again, I did a year and a half, not saying that you do that. If I were going back in time and starting fresh, or I should say, if I was starting fresh today, having never done this, I would absolutely take a little bit of time to listen to other podcasters and determine how their skill sets could be imparted into what I was doing. So if you have not done that yet, please do so. Put on an analytical cap. Listen to some of your favorite podcasters. Hell, if you're watching me or listening to me, maybe there's some things about what I do that you could use and you can emulate. Maybe there's some things that I do that you absolutely hate, and you can say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to sound like Jason. And that's completely respectable, because this is your production and this is your voice. So going back and thinking about this overall, I think planning is the overall theme of today's live stream and today's podcast. If I had to start fresh today, I would absolutely pour more time into planning and preparing and setting myself up to succeed in this industry, because 90% of podcasts don't get beyond 3 episodes. And that's because the creators behind those podcasts lose their passion once the work begins. And oftentimes that happens because the numbers don't pour in. They're not growing at a rapid pace right from the start. So setting yourself up to succeed requires that plan. It requires those practice swings, but coming into it with that right mindset, which is how I'm going to wrap this up, is going to change everything. So putting emphasis on mindset and what I want to accomplish from podcasting long-term, that's one of the biggest things I would look at. Again, going back to the whole starting out of spite, that was not the right mindset. And I would recommend that to absolutely no one. Was I able to get away with it? Yes. I feel I'm a little differently wired up here to have gotten into that. And maybe it's not even a question of wiring. Maybe it's just a question of the fact that I was fortunate to find my calling by accident. I got into podcasting for the wrong reasons, but instantly realized I'm in the right place and I want to keep getting better at this. And I'm going to devote my life to getting better at podcasting, being in this position of storytelling. Now, a big thing for me is doing this live. I have dedicated myself to being live almost on a daily basis in an effort to get better, in an effort to improve. I want these skills to translate to what I do on a stage, because that's going to be the next evolution for me, is finding more stages to speak on. More on that later. Mindset is everything. If you come into podcasting with this mindset that the world is going to fall at your feet because you pressed record, you are not going to have a good time. If you come into this with the mindset that you have a story to tell, you have a message to deliver, and you are committed to bringing value to the world and impacting your little corner of the market, you're going to go far. Because if you're committed to doing this the right way, you're going to learn a lot of great lessons along the way, but the experience that you gain is going to be even better than the overall end result that you're looking to achieve. The journey is better than the destination, as they say. Look at me pulling out all the quotes today. In this journey, if you have the right mindset, you can absorb so much knowledge. You can establish so much authority in your space. And you can cultivate so many powerful relationships just by having these powerful conversations with your guests and with your audience members. There's so much value in doing that, but you have to have the right mindset first. So if I was starting fresh today, strategy, practice, mindset. Those 3 items would be at the top of my priority list. Are they at the top of yours? That's going to do it for today's installment of Podcast Theory Live. I am coming at you each and every weekday here on YouTube with brand new installments of Podcast Theory Live. If you're catching the podcast replay, those go out shortly afterwards on the audio streams. Find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast streaming apps. But I'd love for you to join me live on YouTube if you're not here, because you can ask questions, add comments, and we can rap back and forth as these episodes come together. But until we meet again on the next installment of Podcast Theory Live, my name is Jason Sircone. Thank you for being here today. Good talk. I will see you out there.